Hello and welcome. In today's video, we are going to continue on where we left off the last video or maybe a couple videos ago. What I would advise is before watching this video to make sure that you have watched the how to set up a remote data source and use a back office to show those users video. Because what we're going to be doing today is, the users that we have gotten into our application via the remote data source, I would like to invite them to be the web users of my application. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to use, those remote data source users and some expressions to get these users invited to our application. And it also serves as a nice base for some other challenges that I have in mind. So let's get started. So the first thing we are going to do is we're going to the project users page that we have created previously. This is a back office page that shows the remote data that we have on our page. So there is something that I would like to change because, as I said, I want to be able to invite these users to become my web users. If you've watched the email video, you could even add an email step to this whole flow and invite them via an official email. But for today, we're just going to add these users we have in a remote location to our actual own location. And that's just the start of it. So what I would like is I want a button per remote data user, per project user, that says invite user to application. So as you can see, when I click on the data table over here in my page builder, I can't open it, and that's because it is within a wrapper. And we can unlock that wrapper by simply pressing the lock button on the bottom left if you have clicked on the wrapper before. So now I can select everything on my data table. Also meaning that I can drag a nice action button in there. So let's dive into that. And let's have a look. The action button is over here. I'm going to add the action button to the box right now. I'm going to leave this to be a very simple blue action button, but feel free to change the styling to your liking, of course. The button text is going to be invite user. So yeah, just invite user. Sounds good. And well, the next thing we're going to do is pass value to the action, because we do need to send the ID of the data table record to our action, and we're going to do that by selecting the ID. Then we're diving into the action. And the first things first, of course, when we work in an action, make sure that the settings are set up properly. So give it a proper name, invite remote project user, and the permission is that I want admins to be able to press this button so that they can invite users to the application, not web users, because that is something that I feel like is important in my application. A little bit of governance to keep in mind. Press save. And right now, we have some information. Then we are going to the start, because, when we start with an action, as we may remember from the action courses, we need some data to continue with action steps. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to follow the action flow. So the input variable is the ID. So we have provided the ID from our remote user, and we are going to match that up with the ID from the remote user model. Save. Betty knows what to look for now. And that means that we can immediately create a new user based on some of that data that we have stored way further ahead. So press create. And what we're going to do is we're going to be creating a web user using the data from our remote project users. So we have an email address and we have a full name. So we're going to name, here we go, as new application user. There we go. Press save. So now a new user has been created, you think. So let's go back to the page. Let's see what this looks like. So we have a nice invite user button. Press play, press compile. And once the page opens up, We have all these users. And you know what? We're going to start off with Leanne Graham. We're going to press invite user. Well, it seems like the action spun, so she should be invited. So we go to the web user overview, and I can still see only one web user there. So let's go back to our application and think about what might have gone wrong, because a little bit of problem handling is also important. Well, to save us from adding log steps to our action, I can tell you already what has gone wrong. Within our web user data model, we have a couple of properties. And there are two properties which are mandatory to have once a user creates their account for the first time. And that is the first name and the last name, because that is something we deem important. When a user signs up for your application, we want them to sign in with a first name and a last name. Via our remote data model, we are only getting a full name at the moment. So we are left with a challenge, and the challenge is to cut the name apart in a first name and a last name, where as great as we can do, of course, and from there on add them to our application. So what we are going to do is we are going to dive into our invite remote project user action, and we are going to cut up the first name of a user and the last name of the user into two pieces and add those to our create record step. So here we will be able to fill in a first name and a last name after we have been able to snip the first name and the last name out of the full name. So you might have seen the expression theory video. I definitely advise you to look at the expression theory video, because the whole thing with expressions is it basically is mathematical formulas and, well, making sure that we get the data we want to. That is either by snipping bits of data out of the data we have in front of us, saying, for example, if we have a first name and a last name, we can combine those two together to become a full name. But this time we want to do it the other way around. Let me show you that example as well. For example, when a user signs up, where is it? Over here, we have an expression. This has been generated for us by the application template. This is an expression that uses the first name plus a white space, because you know that's important between the first name and the last name. And then it adds the last name. So as you can see, the values that it's given via the start of the action is a first name, a last name. They're also named like that in the keys. They are put in the expression formula, and the output of this is a text type called full name. And then when creating a new record, so in this case, when creating a new web user, it actually is using that full name plus the first name and last name to sign up that web user. But this time we're doing it a little different, because we do first need to cut that full name apart. That's why we're using a separate action. So let's dive into this. So first things first, of course, to get the expression step, we're going to go to the block store. So let's go to the block store and get the expression step. So we're going to get it, install into my organization, into the project application. Of course, this in your case will be a different organization, a different application. So check your MyBuddyBlocks environment to figure out what your organization's name is and what your organization or what your application's name is, because it will be difficult, likely, for you to install blocks into my application. Same way for me, of course, I won't be able to install any blocks into your application. We have to do that ourselves. So let me refresh the page. And there we go. We have a nice expression step. So first thing first, I am going to make sure to get the full name from going to get the first name from the full name. And I'm going to do this as followed. I'm going to get from my object that I'm getting from the page, which is a remote project user. I'm going to get the name. I'm going to call this full name because the name as we see it over here is the full name of the user. And our idea, our goal, or at least my goal right now, is to split the first name and the last name based on the white space in between. This might mean that for certain users that will be a slight bit of a trickery, a tricky invitation, because in my case, my name's Odin van Eyck. That means that I will be invited as Odin van. The last bit will not be added. We will be able to look into that later. It's also a good assignment to start understanding regex. I'll get to that in a second. But this is, for now, the first step in understanding expressions and how we're going to set this up. So, first, I'm going to retrieve the full name in my expression. And we can do that by opening up two curly braces, typing out full name, closing up with two curly braces, then close up with the apostrophes, then split the name. And how we are going to split the name is we're going to be using regex. And let me open up the regexer website, which I would recommend to use, for example. If you have a name, you could say, for example, I would like to grab a certain bit of a text, or I would like to grab the domain of an email address by using a regex pattern. Well, currently, it might look like a bunch of abracadabra, and that's also why I want to tell you to look into regex. I could dive into every single of the anchors right now, but I'm just going to try and explain the basics of the expression. But regex is basically basic JavaScript formulas within your application. So the regex code that I'm going to use is, I've got it right here. So basically what it does is this looks for all the letters that we have of the alphabet, and it splits basically on the first white space that it can find. And when counting in programming languages, you always start with 0, then you go to 1, then you go to 2, so you never start with 1, 2, 3, but you start with 0, 1, 2. So we're going to grab word 0 out of the full name. In this case, that would likely be the first name of anyone that signs up. I want this to be a text, and we're going to be calling this first name. So there we go. So basically what I'm doing is I'm opening with a bracket, slash, then opening with a bracket. Between these two brackets, between these two, we have a white space, closing up, slash G, closing with a bracket. Then I've got square brackets, and in between those square brackets, I have a 0. So again, this is regex formulating formulas within expressions. This is a tricky, advanced kind of thing to get the results you want. And yeah, it's not always as simple. Sometimes it takes me a while as well, but that's okay. You know, that's programming. It's there to be a nice little puzzle for our awesome innovations. So this is how we can get to our full name. So the output type will be text, and the result, the name of that bit of text, I will call first name. And now we're going to do exactly the same for the last name. Let me just copy this expression, because you know what? We might as well use this. Drag an expression in here, press there, and we're going to do the same with the full name again. So we're going to get the full name, and there we go. The output type is going to be text as last name. And the expression is going to be almost completely the same, but instead of using number 0 in the names, we're going to be going for part 2. So basically we're cutting the name up in bits. So we have, in my case, or in my colleague's case, for example, Jip Volkers. We have Jip, that's part 0 of the name. Then the white space in between his first and last name, that's part 1. And then we have Volkers, his last name. That is part 2 of the full name. It's going to be a bit tricky, but this is just for now to get the result we want. We want to get the data from our remote data source into our application. In any cases where you are using your own remote data source, it might even be better because you might already have a first and a last name. Using regex expressions is something we want to avoid, or at least not use until we really have to, because you'd always want to get the data as straight up as possible. That way you don't have to frolic and well, do whatever with your data. You just want to leave it as it is, of course. So right now we are going to add the first name and last name to our create record. So first name and our last name as new application user. I'm going to save that. Wait till that is all done, the application compiling. So then we start, we have two expressions that cut up the name. We'll create a record, and I'm going back to the project users page, and I'm going to press play, press compile. Wait a second, and there we go. So now, if I press play, I should be able to invite a user. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to invite Clementine to my application. Press invite. Let's go to the web users. Ooh. I too have to admit when I'm wrong. I have been looking, I was like, oh, I cannot add any new users. And of course, it is very, very important that when you are setting up your new user invites, that you invite them all accordingly. So whenever you assign a last name to a last name, that's important. But assigning an email to an About Me segment is probably not going to work. So maybe you have been, you saw that already. Maybe you've been shouting my name through the screen. I can hear some frustrated screams from beyond the wall already. Hearing you shout my name saying, Odin, should have been an email. So let's have a look. So the property email address to the value email, I hope you didn't click along and you caught on a little bit before me. So let's do that. Let's go back, press play. And now, whenever we are inviting a user, so let's go to the back office, press remote user. We're gonna invite Clementine again. And then we go to the web users. And as you can see, there she is. She's been invited to the application. I can easily delete her as well as a web user. I can go back to my remote users and say, I'm going to invite Nicolas. Invite user, go to my web users, and there Nicolas is. So, a couple of lessons. Changing your back office pages by the wrapper with the wrapper, click on the log icon in the bottom left to unlock the wrapper and add buttons or add items to your back office. When inviting users and when creating new items or creating new objects in your application, make sure you value map the proper items, and also expressions. The mathematical formulas in programming are a bit of a hassle, but there are so many websites to help you out with. I would personally love to guide you past all of them in a video, but that's going to take a long while. So for now, understand that with data, there is some data changing going on. There is some data manipulation going on. So in this case, we are manipulating a full name into a first name and a last name, and we are using that to properly invite a new web user. Thanks for watching.